ever wonder why the moon looks so huge when it's near the horizon? Well, it must be closer to the Earth, right? The moon orbits 384,400 kilometers away from the Earth, and that orbit is constant. It doesn't get any closer. So what's going on here? Well, to solve this mystery, we need to examine just how we see the world in the first place.
We see with our eyes, right? Well, not exactly. We see with our brain. The eyes collect random bits of light and change them into electrical impulses. It's the brain that takes these impulses and converts them into the three-dimensional world we see. Well, how does it do that? Well, the brain is like a detective. It unconsciously gathers clues from the scene and combines them with what it already knows to provide a report on what's what and what's where. This detective work keeps us from walking into walls, being hit by buses, and falling off cliffs. It helps us survive in a three-dimensional world.
But what does all this talk of clues have to do with our moon mystery? Well, when the brain can collect a number of different clues at a scene, it can make a pretty good assessment of what's going on. But if the brain can only collect, say, one clue, well, then you may be operating under an illusion. And that's just what our moon mystery is, an illusion.
The moon illusion takes advantage of one of the most important clues the brain uses to judge the position and distance of objects: familiar size.
You see, it's difficult to judge the size and distance of an unfamiliar object unless you have a familiar object to compare it to.
When the moon sinks to the horizon, you unconsciously compare it to the terrain, along with familiar objects like buildings and trees. This causes you to perceive the moon as being larger than when it sits high in the sky.
Now, you can test this illusion by looking at the moon between your legs upside down. You see, this distorts all your depth clues. Buildings and trees just look like shapes. It's supposed to lessen the moon illusion.
Oh, goodness. Also gives you a pretty good head rush. Now, familiar size is just one clue the brain uses to tell the position of objects. Another important clue is something called convergence. To understand what that means, you need to go on a little field trip.
There's something about the Renaissance period, that mixture of Gothic architecture, surreal impressionism, showing the complexity of the human condition.
Yes. Fascinating portrayal, really. Impassioned Christ, the abject horror of the moneylenders.
Oh, I agree.
Yes.
No. See, it's a guy who's very upset because someone's cheated him out of some money. So he's got the cat of nine tails because it's payback time.
Mike, you don't get it, do you? No culture.
I'm afraid you've set off the riff-raff alarm, darling.
Let's move on.
You know, artists are in the illusion business. I mean, they've been fooling us for years. Think about it. They create a three-dimensional world on a two-dimensional canvas. So, how do they do it? Creativity, inspiration, introspection. It's math.
Maestro. The key to creating the illusion of a third dimension on a two-dimensional canvas is a technique called linear perspective. The basic idea here is that all horizontal lines eventually converge at a point on the horizon. Linear perspective takes advantage of the clue I was talking about before, convergence. For the brain, converging lines indicate distance. Every artist knows they have to take advantage of convergence to make their work look realistic. Let me show you just how powerful convergence is. Take a look at this picture. Which one of these cows is larger? The top one, right? Well, take away the background, and the cows are the same size. The converging lines of the background trick the brain into assuming the top cow is larger. Overlap is another powerful clue. When one object overlaps another and partially covers it, the first object appears to be closer. Here, the queen seems closer. But upon further examination, you'll notice we clipped the corner of the king. it's actually about a foot in front of the queen. The brain relies heavily on these different clues to make sense of the world, and most of the time we take that for granted. You really don't appreciate the importance of these clues until you look at scenes where the clues are distorted. Everything makes sense in these pictures until you take a closer look. The brain jumps from one configuration to another as it tests different ways of perceiving the scene. These are unending puzzles.
Now, all these clues I've been talking about are important, but they're not the only way the brain sees the world. You see, within about 50 meters, we use binocular vision. Let me show you what I mean. Put your finger up to your face like that. Look at it with one eye and then the other. You notice your finger is shifting? Well, that's because each eye is seeing your finger from a slightly different angle. What happens is the brain takes these two angles, puts them together to create 3 dimensions. Now, there's a piece of technology that takes advantage of our binocular vision, invented more than 100 years ago. This piece of technology, in my opinion, revolutionized the home entertainment industry as we know it. It's called the stereoscope, and you probably remember it as the Viewmaster. The way this works is there are 2 different pictures of the same scene shot from slightly different angles. When put together, create 3D. I can see it now. Inquiring Minds on Viewmaster.
No way.
No, seriously, we can have each episode on one of these discs.
Coming up next.